Today's story is called God Asks Abraham to Give the Gift of Isaac Back. It may come in this box, or you may also find it in the round red and gold box. In each box, I try to separate the items that you need at the beginning over here from the items that you will need later on in the story. It's easier to tell this story on a brown piece of felt and then connect it to your mountain. We have this mountain available, and the other class will have a smaller mountain. Our story today comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 22. We are continuing our study on the beginning of God's covenant through Abraham. Wow, it's a red box. We have not had a red box before. I wonder why it's red. Oh, I remember this story. This is a very hard story. In fact, when you hear this story, it may remind you of the hardest story ever told, the hardest story in the Bible. But it's not that story. We remember that Abraham and Sarah had waited so long for the gift of Isaac. And when he came in their old age, they loved to play with him and watch him grow. His name meant laughter, and I'm sure as old people who were his parents, they laughed and laughed and laughed. They watched him learn to talk and begin to take his first steps. As he grew, I am sure they told him all about how he was the promised child for whom they waited years and years and years. He heard the stories from his father, how God had come and promised him that from him he would have children as many as the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea. Because Abraham and Sarah loved God so much, Isaac loved him too, and he was so close to his parents. One day, God came to Abraham and he asked him to do a very, very hard thing. He said, "Give the gift of Isaac back to me." What could that mean? He had waited so long. This was his only child. This was the promised child. What did this mean? God was asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. When they sacrificed in Bible times, they used an animal, a pure animal like a lamb. And when the animal was put on the altar, he was killed and his blood came down on the altar. And it was the way God forgave people's sins, because they deserved to be on the altar. But instead, people deserved to be killed for their sin, but instead God would supply a lamb. Oh, this was a hard thing. But the Bible never says that Abraham got mad at God or quit believing in God. It doesn't even say that he waited years to do this. Abraham obeyed God. And the very next day, Abraham and Isaac began the long journey to the mountain where they would sacrifice Isaac. Abraham didn't tell Isaac what was going to happen. And they just took this long journey. First they had servants with them, but as they got closer to the mountain, Abraham said, "You servants stay here with the animals. We are going up to the mountain to make our sacrifice." There, Abraham built an altar, and they put the wood on it. Earlier on the journey, Isaac has said, Abraham, my father, we have the wood, we have a fire, but where is the animal? And Abraham said something so important. He said, God will provide, Jehovah Jireh. Abraham had learned that God was the great provider, that God always kept his promise, and after all those years of waiting and waiting for a son, it had happened. Isaac had come. And it made no sense to give Isaac back to God on this altar, except that Abraham trusted God. He believed God. He loved God and he knew God. So Abraham put the gift of Isaac on the altar. And as he began to lift his knife to kill his son, this is what happened. I am reading from Genesis chapter 22. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took his knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I, here am I. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, because you have not held back your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked in the bushes, and he found another gift. He found a ram to sacrifice instead of his son. So he took his son, the gift of his son, off the altar. And he put the gift of the ram on the altar instead. And he sacrificed the ram. This is a very hard story of how God tested Abraham. This is a very beautiful story because it shows how Abraham has grown in his faith and love for the one true God. I wonder what Abraham said to Isaac on their journey. I wonder what Abraham was thinking during the journey. I wonder if every step was hard for him to take. I wonder what Isaac felt when his father tied him to the altar. I wonder what Abraham felt when he heard the angel's words to tell him to stop. And then I wonder what both Abraham and Isaac thought when God provided the gift of the ram in the bushes. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide.